Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Today, Kenji and I are so excited to have John Brauc. He is a real estate investor, a friend that I met through the Tony Robbins world, and was just so impressed with some of the things he was doing in Chicago and how many units he had grown his portfolio to. We had to invite him here to share his story and give us some pointers on how to grow a massive portfolio by yourself. So welcome, John.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Looking forward to it.
So John, for those out there who are curious of what you've done and how you got where you are, could you tell us a little bit about your story, your real estate investing journey?
Sure. Started out, I've probably been in the business for about 32, 33 years. I hate to say that and think how old I am at this point. But, I started out, when I was younger, my family owned an 18-unit apartment building. Back then, I was 5 years old. And I still remember shoveling coal into the boiler room, into the furnace. And I can still remember that smell. But my parents unfortunately got divorced and they sold that property. And as I got older, I think I started around, I was 27 years old. My father passed away and he left me $40,000 and I didn't want to waste it. Mm-hmm. And so my uncle had some multifamily property and I just remember like counting on my fingers. Wow, how many does he have? What's he make? You know what? I think I'm going to buy a 9-unit with that, buy an apartment building. And I found a 9-unit and I had seller financing. And this was before internet and all the classes and all the stuff that, we have nowadays. And so you had to figure everything out on your own. And so then I wound up buying a 9-unit. I got owner financing plus a mortgage. Had to do a lot of rehab. So I spent work days in a computer firm. I was in the computer business. Worked all day at the computer firm. And then at nights, 6 days a week, I'd work at the building. Friday nights, I'd get to go out, but Saturday and Sunday would work all day rehabbing.
What do you think led you to do that, to work that hard at that age? Was there anything specific?
My mom's always been a super hard worker. She's worked a lot of jobs to support us when my parents separated. I was doing watchmaking at 14 years old. She got me into a jeweler and I was doing repairs at 14 years old on watches. So I learned early that it was important to work. And I got that a lot, I would say, from my mother. And so, she also had an apartment building before then, and I learned how to, wallpaper and all that kind of crazy stuff. And I've always just been good at fixing things. It just comes natural to me. So that part I'm lucky at. And so that's kind of what drove that forward. And, so that 9-unit, after doing all the rehab, I wound up refinancing and then I wound up investing into an 18-unit. And then I, start that process all over. And typically I'd have to buy troubled buildings because I didn't have a lot of money. So, what I had was the income from my computer firm, which was not bad, but, so I was always using my own capital. And so I fix something up, I'd refi, pull that money out and go buy another asset, and typically they were troubled assets. In the 18-unit, again, I had owner finance. Actually, on that one, we just took over the note because it was half empty. The building was distressed. And so we went in there and took over the note. Within a year, then I was able to refinance it because now you establish, there's a rule if you own it for over a year, now you've established, some precedence within that property. And so the bank looks at that as equity now. And so I was able to do that. And I would just constantly do that. So then I bought a 6-unit and I bought and it just kept on rolling in that fashion. And so that's how I started. In about 2008, when I went to the South Side of Chicago. So the South Side of Chicago is, there's some areas that are low income. And I went there because of the deals. And again, I was rich on paper, but I was poor as far as cash flow. And so that was always an interesting thing. And that's why I went south, because I could pick up these units for cheap. And so we were, doing a lot of work. So I picked up a 32-unit. It was half empty. There was a rent strike. Nobody was paying their rent. We had prayer meetings in the basement to try to get the rest of the tenants on board. I promised what I would fix. And I told them what I would fix. But I also found a bank at that time, Community Investment Corp, who's still around, and they invest in troubled areas. And so they actually gave me $100,000 matching grant. If I put 100,000, they matched 100,000, and it was forgivable over 5 years, which was actually phenomenal. And they were able to give me the loan for the property, and it worked out beautiful. It was a great match because they helped me buy. I probably was up to about 1,000 units at one point, and it was all self done, no investors, no nothing, just by myself with the bank. And the bank truly helped me because I could come in with 10% down because they had energy loans. So they would lend me up to 80% of completed value. Then a 10% would be an energy loan. And so I'd only have to come up with 10% as long as the numbers would match. And so it truly worked out. And they're still doing some of those programs today. So it's been an interesting ride. A lot of hard work, but an interesting ride.
So let's talk about when you're taking over these properties that are 50% empty and that, there's that rent strike. How did you manage your fear at that point? And how were you able to turn around these properties? Because a lot of people in our community are buying value add, but not many of us are buying 50% empty with a rent strike.
Some of it's stupidity. But I guess I saw the end. I could one thing I can always do and envision the end, what the property is going to look like. I really worked on my numbers. I knew what I can do, and the good thing is the bank, when I would get that loan, they would give me a construction loan. So I had, at the closing, you would prepay the interest. So I had no payments for 6 to 8 months on a mortgage because it was prepaid right on a loan. That's how I was able to float, that building being empty like that for a while, because I had no mortgage payment for 8 months, 6 months, depending on what I told them my construction would do, because we would prepay that, at closing. And so you're obviously leveraging that, right? So I'd only have to pay 20%, if you think about it, right, of that interest that was being prepaid. And so it allowed me to get in there. And plus, if they would loan me up to 90%, I only have to come with 10%. And so it really worked. There was no other way I would have been able to do it at that time. I literally did not have money. Like I said, I was paper rich, money poor.
So what happened during the downturn? Because we don't talk to too many investors who invested through multiple downturns. Sounds like you've been investing for a long time. So you've seen the ups and downs of the market. So can you tell us about that 2008 downturn?
So multiple downturns. So in 2008 was a downturn when I just started investing in the South Side. And actually, it worked out really well for me. I think two things are super important going into a downturn: that you're not over leveraged, right? Some of it's luck, but it's also not being over leveraged, right? And luckily, going into that point, I refinanced everything prior, so nothing was coming due. So that was the lucky part, right? But there were still guys and gals who leveraged them way too much. And at that point in 2008, as the feds were coming in, they were writing down values. And so, a lot of banks were coming to guys and gals and going, listen, $2 million loan, but that property's worth, $1.5 million. You need to give us $500,000 and we're foreclosing on that asset, right? Even though it cash flowed, everything was perfect, right? But the values didn't meet. And so either you gave them, $500,000 or they foreclosed and probably sold the note for a fraction of what you owed, which didn't make any sense, but that's what they were doing, right? Luckily, that didn't happen to me at that point, but I did pick up a bunch of notes because of that. There is a lot of fraud going on at that time in Chicago. And so not only were these people over leveraged, there was fraud on the appraisers. So they were taking so much more money out than the properties were actually valued. So nobody wanted to try to save them, right? So that banks were taking them back. But at that time, what they didn't want to do is actually take the asset back because it was bad for them to have it on their books. And so they would start the foreclosure process. I go in and buy the note from them and finish the foreclosure process. Most of the people, and not homes, but a multifamily, but most of these guys, they didn't want them because they were so upside down, it didn't make any sense. And they were more than happy to get it off their back, which was a good thing because it made my life a little easier. But one case that I really did well, there was an 85 unit apartment building. The guy had a $4.5 million note on it. The bank put a receiver in place, right? So they put somebody in to take over the building, but this receiver was not a very good one. So he allowed the building to get stripped. It was on the south side of Chicago. You don't take care of something, the guys come in, steal all the copper. They strip the place blind. And so now it was vacant. And another friend of mine who was a banker said, listen, I know what they'll take. If they need to get it off their books by the end of the month, offer them 50K. They'll take 50K for the building, right? And I was in Europe at the time. I called the broker and I said, listen, I'll give you 50K. And he was mad. He goes, no way I'm offering that. I go, you have to put that offer in. And he did, and they accepted the offer.
Wow. So it was relationships with bankers that would allow you to go and get these notes, it sounds like.
Yes, and it helped. And so, the property probably, but when it was stripped, it was probably only worth 4, 5, 600,000. They had because it was stripped out, they had a $4.5 million note. I came with 50,000. I decided I didn't want to rehab that property at the time, so I just kept it clean. I had dogs in, so nobody would be around, and I sold it about 2 years later for about 850,000. So I probably had a couple $100,000 in to maintain it, back taxes, all the other nonsense, but it wasn't a bad deal. But it's also interesting that a bank will write something off that much, right? That's a lot of write-off. That's almost $4.5 million write-off.
Wow. And tell us about the security, because a lot of us, buy properties, we have to turn around, and what we're doing and putting in security cameras. A couple people have had to hire people to walk the property, but it sounds like you put dogs in there.
On the vacant one, I actually wanted to put dogs in it. It just made more sense, right? You couldn't tell it was vacant from the outside because we kept it spotless. The grass was manicured. We kept it nice and clean. I mean, the windows were boarded up, but other than that, you wouldn't know it was vacant. And I think that kept the city off us, and and people knew that we cared, even though it was vacant. And so I thought it worked out well, because the guys who bought it just totally fell apart on them. But after that, it's out of my hands. But the South Side or low income areas, depending on where you're at in the country and what type of low income, they can be rough. I mean, they're stealing copper, they're constantly, breaking in and stealing things. And so it can be a challenging time. It definitely can be challenging at times.
So what do you think were some of those keys to your success to grow so quickly and to do what you did?
It was a lot of hard work. There was a lot of sweat and blood and tears. I mean, I was swinging the hammer with the guys at that time. I had a crew. I was doing a lot of work. I was on a job every day. I think at that time in 2008, I quit my full-time job a little before that. I can't remember the exact dates, but to go full-time in real estate, the only thing I wish I would have done is, afterwards, I thought a year later after I quit my job, I remember sitting on my bed thinking about something, and I thought about my old job. I was there for 15 years. And I thought, God, I didn't even miss it once, right? And I said, I wish I'd have quit 10 years earlier. Mm-hmm. Right. The only good thing is before I quit, I had 100 units under my belt, and it at least gave me at that point enough cash flow that I could sustain my life. But I was young. I didn't have much going on. I lived in one of my apartments. I didn't need a whole lot of cash, right? Not like today. Today I couldn't. It wouldn't work for me today, but I was young and I didn't need a lot of cash and wasn't buying a lot of things. So it worked out really well for me.
So I would imagine that you're getting phone calls all the time and with problem after problem. Assuming that's the case, how did you manage all that?
Well, I was probably I managed 100 units on my own, up to about 100 units. I was doing it myself. I was actually cleaning hallways, showing units. I mean, I was, chief cook and bottle washer. And I didn't like that part. I didn't mind, but after a while, it's not something that I aspire to do, is, vacuum hallways. And I slowly hired people to help me. And as I acquired more, we got more serious. I used to use QuickBooks. I got a property management software. I hired a couple of girls in the office. I had more guys on staff. And so I started to grow my staff and start, implementing, a real business. And so then I had a small management company of my own that we would manage these assets. And that's how I started to handle it all, because I had guys, but I was still handling calls at night, and, it can be a pain, but you grow and you learn and you get better. One thing I wish at that point, I would have did better was just have better organization within my organization, right? Better policies, better procedures. It would have taken a lot more off my back. I think for a while there, we flew by the seat of our pants, right? Everybody did everything, right? Instead of having structure and organization and all that other good stuff that you should do in a real business, right? It's kind of like a mom and pop shop in a sense, but it worked. So, and it works for a lot of people.
Can you tell us a little bit about negotiating all these seller finance deals? Because I think going into this recession, we're seeing this happen more and more, and not so much the last 5 years. So what are some of the maybe tips and tricks you could give to our community about negotiating successful seller financing deals?
I think first thing first, you need to know your numbers, right? So that you're not going into the deal blind and you understand where you need to be to make the deal work. But trying to be real with the person you're buying with, right? Not bullshitting them, not trying to take advantage. Yeah, we want the best number we can get. That's always the case, right? But fair negotiation, right? Back and forth. I think that helps. A lot of people know when you're trying to take something from them, and they're not going to give it to you. But if you're trying to, negotiate in good faith, I think that helps quite a bit.
What about if you were to do this again? What would you do differently? Are there any big takeaways that you have over the last, 20 something years, 30 years?
You know what? I would grow a better team. I would let go of people that weren't doing what they were supposed to do instead of putting up with it. I was slow to fire. I would fire more quickly. I would make sure that I had better policies and procedures in place so that we all knew exactly what we were supposed to do. That, I think, would be number one. Number two, I would bring in investors. Instead of just using all my own cash, I would have brought in investors. I was too scared to ask anybody for money, right? I had no problem going to a bank, but I just, within myself, there was something within myself, I didn't like doing it. I felt like I owed somebody something if they gave me money, which is totally incorrect. So those are the two things for sure I would do differently.
So if you brought in investors, what would you just that would allow you to scale and grow your business? Is that it
would allow me to scale much bigger back then. I've actually started to do that now. So I did my first fundraising about 5 months ago. We purchased a 253 unit apartment complex in Houston, Texas. And so I have done my first capital raise. How long did it take me? Almost 30 years. But, some people a little slower than others. I'm probably the real slow one here, but it worked out and we're doing well. So
I also really want to highlight for people that bank relationship you had, and so that wherever they are across the country, that they might look for these types of relationships. So can you tell us how you found this bank, what kind of program they had that you were able to use, in a little bit more detail than I knew you touched on it earlier?
Sure. So, I was lucky, when the building I bought, my first Southside building, was in receivership, and CIC Community Investment Corp was the bank. They're in Chicago. And so I was able to talk to Angela Morella at the time, was the person I was dealing with there. And, I learned about her programs because I had to go there because the porches, they were doing porches. So luckily at this time, I was getting all new porches on this building and didn't even know it at the time because the receiver was doing all new porches. And so I had to go in and talk to them about getting these porches paid, the contractor paid, because they were going to pay for them. And so then I found out about what they do. So basically CIC is a conglomerate. At the time, I think it was 47 Illinois banks. They invest into this organization because they need CRA credits, right? They need to invest in impoverished areas because that's federal law, right? So they have to have, so instead of these banks doing it themselves, they invest into this organization, Community Investment Corp, which is a nonprofit that then lends that money out and manages the buildings and the construction and all that other stuff. And their initiative is to support housing in Chicago, right? So troubled buildings, they will go and they'll do different things. I mean, there were times, I talked about the 10% down. There were also times that they actually bought the asset for me. So they bought the property because I needed to close in 2 or 3 weeks. They bought the asset, they physically bought it, and then we wound up doing the note afterwards. So they've got different programs that really helped me out, and I used it. And I don't think I'd have done half as well, especially with the cash flow I had at that time, if they weren't around. So they were definitely a great help for me and many other people in the city.
What were the criteria that they were looking for? Did you have to be serving a certain like median income, or how could you know that they were going to be involved in one of your properties?
Right. Well, they'll invest almost anywhere in Illinois, but they are looking to save properties in low income areas. So that always helped me. So if I was in a more of an impoverished area or low income area, it definitely helped my case on getting a loan. And they're looking for guys and gals who are actually going to do the work and bring these properties back to life, because that's their charter, right? They want to revitalize neighborhoods. And so that's what they're looking to do.
So people could be looking for like a conglomerate of banks from their state that is a nonprofit that is going to be reinvesting in areas that are lower income. And would you go before you even bought the property then to them and say, hey, are you going to participate in this? How much are you going to do? Or did you have to buy the property first?
No, I'd always go to them first, and I had them look at the numbers and tell me what they thought. Right. So I'd come up with my numbers. They'd look at the property. I might get it under contract, but I immediately would start to work with them. Right. And then, one other good thing that I would assume it's across the country, I know it is there's nonprofit organizations like Elevate Energy. And so Elevate Energy is organization. I know they're in multiple states. I don't know all the states they're in, but like in Illinois, we pay X amount of dollars each month on our gas bill and our electric bill that go into a pool for energy savings for multifamily apartment buildings. And so there's organizations like this, like Franklin Energy, Elevate Energy, where they'll go out and they'll seek owners of apartment buildings, and they'll do free roof insulation. They'll do free domestic hot water. They'll do boiler controls. They'll replace older refrigerators, older than 10 years old, all for free. I know I've gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of these incentives for free. Right. And I know it's across the country, and certain states might have more or less, but this is something also that can help people out quite a bit. It's definitely helped me out.
Yeah, I think that's really the value that you bring here today, is for people to hear all the different options available. I know Kenji's previously looked into the energy one with replacing one of our boilers in one of our properties, but yeah, those relationships with the nonprofit and other areas where you can get free incentives to make your property better, so it's a better living place for your tenants, I think is really a powerful thing. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. And it sounds like you still have contacts in Chicago that are still doing this, and so it's something that people can access even now.
Absolutely, and it's helped quite a bit, because you're right. It's all about helping the tenants, right? Because the better you make the property, the more comfortable they are, and the more willing they're to pay your rent and stay. Right. And so it's a win-win, right? Because, I've always thought curb appeal, making a nice unit, even when we're doing low income, we always try to make them the best they could be. Right. We'd always try to clean them every time somebody, leave, we turn and paint and clean them up. Not everybody's happy. You can't make everybody happy, but we tried our best. So.
Are you continuing to invest in low income housing? Even more recently, you had mentioned raising money.
No, I'll admit I got a little burned out. It's a lot more work, and I've done well with it, but we're moving more to B assets, B and A minus assets than we are C assets. I'm not saying I won't do it again, but that's where I'm looking now.
Okay.
All right. Well, we always close our interviews with two questions. The first one is, what is your definition of wealth?
Oof. Well, I think that's changed over time. If I was younger, wealth was all about money in the bank, and I was always striving for that. And I was always, my spreadsheets, I always had them open. I knew what my net worth was. But I think as you go over time, it's really about family. It's about lifestyle. Money's definitely part of it. But it's what you bring to the table, not just money, but who you are personally, who your family is, and how you treat them, and what you can pass along to your family and others around you, right? I've only probably in the last 15 years started donating to different organizations. And I think that's a good thing also, right? To give some money away to help others. And we've also helped tenants out. We've always subsidized certain tenants in need, typically older folks who couldn't meet the rent criteria, especially when we took a building over, because we'd always raise the rents. But there was always one or two that we would just keep their rents low just because we know they couldn't afford it, but they were good people.
I know that's really important to some people in our community as well, is making sure that they have the wealth to be able to do that for people in their buildings. So beautiful to hear that piece too, because I know a lot of people are doing that.
Second question is, what is one mindset, habit, or strategy that separates someone who is wealthy versus someone who is not?
I should say I love money. I don't mean it in a sense that sounds weird, but I think money is important. Money's important to do the things you need to do to be healthy, stay safe, help others. It's not the only thing, but it is definitely a good thing to have. Some people fear money. And I think at times I probably have too, but it's something that will allow you to help generations of your family and others in the future if you can create it and you have a healthy mindset about it. I don't mind giving people money. I don't mind buying dinners for everybody, because when I was younger, I was poor. And I have a lot of friends who used to take me out to dinner or buy me lunch and help me out. And so I try to, pay that forward at this point. Right. And so, I've always tried to not be frugal, but I figure if I don't have enough, I'll make it somehow. Right. The kids asked me the other day, gosh, lunch and dinner is so expensive, Pop. What are you going to do? It keeps on getting more expensive. I go, I'm just going to make more money.
Resourcefulness, right? Knowing that you have the confidence that you can make money no matter what. And that comes from knowing real estate well and knowing that you know how to make money yourself and you're not reliant on anyone else. And so that's really important, I think, to us too. Beautiful.
It's mindset, just like you. And, we go to a bunch of different, workshops and events, try to set our mindset, right? It's all about up here, right? If this is wrong, everything else is wrong. And so if you let the chatter in your head move you, right, it can be a problem, right? You can't let the anger and all the other things drive you. It's going to be there. It's if you act on it or not, right? Because it's going to be there, just the way it's nature of the human brain. And so it's up to us not to allow us to act on it, but to do more good than that.
Thank you so much, John, for your time and for all the pearls you shared about getting up to 1,000 units yourself, which is such a remarkable accomplishment. And we so appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Talk to you later. Bye.